Okay, everyone, how you doing? Hope you're well. This is class number 3, and it's an important class. So maybe the most important class of the semester. We're going to be covering contract law, and toward the end of the class today, we're going to be talking about the first management team assignment. So first thing you need to do before you do the assignment is figure out what team you're on, and here's how you do it. Go on Canvas under the People tab. You'll see the class has been divided into management teams of, I think, 8 people. So find out what team you're on, start making contact with your teammates. The first assignment, which I'm going to describe in a little while, won't be due for a few weeks. So you'll have time to get together with your teammates and figure out how you're going to deal with the assignment. More about that later. Right now, I want to talk about contract law. So let me say a couple of things before we look at a PowerPoint presentation. I think this is a true statement. It is impossible to engage in any kind of business without understanding the law of contracts. What a contract is, how a contract is created, and whether the contract could be enforceable in court. So, a contract in its basic form is an agreement between two parties. Each party takes on some obligations under the contract. If one of the parties breaches the obligation required under the contract, then the other party can sue for breach of contract. So we end up maybe in court because as a result of the breach of the contract, some party has suffered damages. So you can see how important it is in business, and we can just use basic examples. And I think I can convince you that contract law is really critical. So just take something simple like this. You run a restaurant, and obviously you can't do business as a restaurant unless you have food. So, you cook food and you serve it to your customers. And of course, you're probably not the person who's growing the food or, raising the cattle or any of that stuff or making the cheese. So what you have to do is you have to obtain those things from someone else. So if you're running a hamburger restaurant, you need beef for your hamburgers. And you don't raise beef. You're gonna have to buy it from someone. So you would reach out for, I guess, a beef supplier and ask that supplier to deliver to your restaurant a certain amount of beef, maybe every day or several times a week. And it sounds simple. You call up the beef producer and say, hey, deliver 500 pounds of beef to my restaurant Monday morning, 9 o'clock. And the guy on the other side says, oh, okay. And here's the problem for you. You are going to start doing business that Monday morning, which means you need to have the materials necessary to serve your clients, your customers. What if the beef doesn't show up? Well, if we didn't have the law of contracts, then there's nothing you could do. In other words, the guy doesn't deliver the beef. You call him up and you ask, where's that stuff I ordered? And he says, oh, I just, I didn't bother, or my truck broke down, or I sold it for more money to someone else. And think of what the position that puts you in. You're essentially out of business starting right then. So the law of contracts was created, I think, to solve that problem. So if we enter into a contract with the beef supplier and the beef supplier does not deliver the goods, then that beef supplier has breached our agreement. And because it's a valid and enforceable contract, I can take him to court and sue him for the damages he caused by not delivering that product. What are my damages? Probably the profits I would have made selling food in my restaurant had I had the beef. So all the profits I lost, those are my damages. And I might be able to get those from the beef supplier once I go to court and I succeed in convincing the court that I should prevail in my case. So you can see that without the law of contracts, business would be in chaos because it would be very risky to do business. Would you open a restaurant if you couldn't be sure that the beef you needed for your restaurant would never be delivered? If you weren't sure that it would be there, you really couldn't even start your business. So in a way, the law of contracts is insurance that some other person, the one you're entering into the contract, will perform some duty for you. And of course, you have a duty too. You've got to pay for the beef. So both parties to a contract take on new obligations. And if they violate those obligations, what I call breach the contract, then the other party has a right to go to court and seek damages for the damage you caused when you breached the contract, right? So, and so these contracts are everywhere in business. In fact, I'm pretty sure every one of you sitting out there today is a party to a contract. I'd have to believe that all of you out there have, for example, a cell phone. Well, think about that. You want to get a cell phone and be able to call people using your cell phone. So you need both the phone and the service, the cell phone service provided by the company. You don't have any of those things yourself. You don't have your own personal, system of communicating with others. You have to rely on others. So you go to the cell phone store, you pick out a phone, you pay for it, you agree for the phone company to provide you with cellular telephone service, and you walk away. Now, how would you feel if there was no contract? And so you walk away with the phone, and the cell phone company decides one day, well, we're just not going to provide you with cell phone service. If you didn't have an enforceable contract with the cell phone company, there's nothing you can do about that. So you can see that contracts are really the heart and soul of doing business in this world. So we need to talk about the basics of contract law. What is a contract? We started that conversation. And more important, how can we be sure that our contracts, the contracts we make with others, can be enforceable in court? In other words, we want to be sure that if the other party breaches the contract, we can take that person to court and get damages for the damage they did to us by breaching that contract. Right? So we need to know what a contract is, and most important, what makes a contract enforceable in court. Right? So there's our primary concern today is all about that. Right? So now let's take a look at my PowerPoint presentation. We're going to slowly build toward an understanding of contract law. So let me share my PowerPoint slides with you. Let me start the PowerPoint presentation. Here we go. Contract law. That's what we're talking about. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what are those things, those required elements that create a valid and enforceable contract? What things have to be in every contract in order for it to be enforceable in court? So we're going to break down contracts into their component parts. All right. And so here it is. Here's the slide. These are the components of a contract. So how do we arrive at something that becomes an enforceable contract? We go through these steps. The first step is someone has to make an offer to enter into a contract. The other party has to accept that offer. There has to be what the law calls consideration to support that agreement. We're going to talk more about consideration in a minute. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It has a special meaning in the law. In the law of contracts, consideration has a special meaning. It's not being kind to someone. That's not what it is. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The contract that you form then, step number 4, has to be for a legal purpose. You can't enter into a contract which is against the law. For example, me and you entering into a contract, we're going to rob the bank on Saturday. Well, guess what? That's not a valid contract because it's illegal. So we're going to talk about the illegality or legality component of a valid contract. And then we have to talk about the capacity of the parties. Are the people who entered into the contract capable of understanding what they're doing? Some people are not. And so we need to worry about that. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Especially when we think about, can people who are not adults, people under age 18, can they enter into contracts? Do they know what they're doing? Do they have the capacity to enter into a contract? We're going to talk about that in a little while. All of these necessary components of a valid contract. So let's just use some examples here. So what is this offer thing? It's things like this. I will sell you my car for $400. I'm making you an offer. Okay. In order to form a contract, you'd have to accept my offer. Yes, I'll pay you $400. So offer from me and then an acceptance from you. That's our agreement. Is it yet a valid contract? No, because we've got to talk about the other elements. We've got to talk about, was that agreement supported by consideration? Is this contract for a legal purpose? Selling a car, I'm sure, is a legal purpose. Do both parties have the capacity to enter into a contract? So we have to ask all those questions. If you cut my lawn, I'll pay you $50. I'm offering you the job of cutting my lawn, for which I'll pay you $50. There's my offer. If you agree, if you accept my offer, then we have an agreement. We don't yet have a contract because we've got to ask about consideration, legality, and capacity. See how it works? If you deliver 50 cubic yards of concrete, I will pay you $5,000. There's another offer. All right, it's out there, and it doesn't become an agreement until someone accepts my offer. All right, so there you go. That's what I mean by offer. All right, that's the way we start our negotiation before we enter into a contract. All right, so you can see then the next step is acceptance. I will sell you my car for $400. There's the offer. The acceptance is it's a deal. You accept my offer and pay me $400. If you cut my lawn, I will pay $50. I promise to cut your lawn for $50. You've accepted my offer. If you deliver 50 cubic yards of concrete, I'll pay you $5,000, and you deliver the 50 cubic yards. You've accepted my offer. See how it works? So there's the first two steps. There has to be an offer by one party, which is accepted by the other party. All right. Okay, so you can imagine lots of different examples of this. You go into the cell phone store. You want to buy that phone, and then you want to have service through the cell phone company so that you can use the phone. You go into the store offering to buy a phone and offering for the cell phone company to provide you service. If the store sells you the phone, they've accepted your offer to buy the phone. And if they enter into an agreement with you to provide you cell phone service, they've accepted your offer. So you have an agreement. Right? Remember, there's still work to do. Just because we have offer by one party and acceptance by the other party, we're not there yet. We don't know whether we have a valid and enforceable contract unless we go through the next three steps, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But you can imagine in the real world, all kinds of crazy things can happen, and we have to be prepared for that. So let's go back to my basic example. I offer to sell you my car for $400. There's my offer. Let's say this is your answer. I'll only pay you $300. Have you accepted my offer? No. In fact, you've made a counteroffer. And in the law, that's an important event. So let's just think it through. I offer to sell you my car for $400. Your response is, no, I'll only pay you $300. You have not accepted my offer, and you've made a counteroffer. So your counteroffer now is like a new offer. You're now offering to me to buy my car for $300, which I can accept or I can refuse to accept. All right, so think about the possibility of a counteroffer. But it has one important effect that you have to remember. It's important for our course, and it's important in your life. So let's take my example again. I offer to sell you my car for $400. Your response is, I will only pay you $300. You've now made a counteroffer, but it has one more important effect. Because you've made a counteroffer, you can't change your mind now and accept my $400 offer. Because by making a counteroffer, you have terminated my original offer. So let's play it through. I offer to sell you my car for $400. Your response is, I will only pay you $300. And then right after you say that, if you change your mind and you say, oh, after all, I'll pay you the $400. Do we have an agreement? No. Because by making a counteroffer, you have terminated, you've essentially extinguished the original offer. Right? And so by making a counteroffer, it has an effect. Right? So you got to keep that in mind. Right? So that's something that happens all the time in business. I'll buy from you 500 pounds of beef for $1 a pound. The other party says, no, I won't sell you beef unless you pay $1.50 a pound. There's a counteroffer. right? So it happens all the time, and it's part of the negotiation process, right? But that counteroffer has an effect. It terminates the original offer. And some other things also terminate the offer. So if we sort of think about these, I offer to sell you my car for $400, and your answer is, I don't want your car. Well, the offer is now terminated. Right? You've rejected my offer. I call you up and I say, I'll sell you my car for $400. And before you can answer, I say, I've changed my mind. I'm not selling my car. Can I do that? Yes. That's called revoking my offer. That happens all the time in the world too. What if I make you an offer to sell you my car, and before you accept my offer, I die? Can you now accept my offer? No. My death terminates my offer. You see, this makes sense. It's just common sense. Right? I offer to sell you my car for $400, but before you accept my offer, my car burns up, in my driveway because there's a leak of the fuel, and it's nobody's fault. Is my offer to sell my car terminated? Yeah, I have no car to sell anymore. It's terminated. My offer's terminated. It's been destroyed. Right? I might say to you, I will sell you my car for $400, but I must have your answer by 5 o'clock tomorrow. And you call me up the next day at 6 o'clock and accept my offer. Can you do that? No, because my offer terminated at 5 o'clock that day. So the lapse of time can terminate an offer. All right. Okay, so you can see we're sort of building our understanding of contract law. So offer, so far we've talked about offer and acceptance. Right? So if I make an offer and you accept my offer, the next step is that agreement supported by legal consideration? And here's what that means in contract law. So follow me here. This is not what you think it means. In order for that agreement to be a valid contract, each of the parties to the contract must suffer what's called a legal detriment. All right? So let's just take my car example again. All right? I offer to sell you my car for $400, and your response is, I accept your offer. Here's $400. Right? So there was an offer, and you accepted my offer. So we have an agreement. Next question is it supported by legal consideration? Each party must take on an obligation they didn't have before. That's what we mean by detriment. Each party to the contract takes on an obligation they didn't have before they made the agreement. So here's our agreement. I'll sell you my car for $400. You accept my offer and pay me $400. So what legal obligation have I now taken on? Me, I'm the seller. What obligation have I taken on as a result of our agreement? I have to deliver the car. There's my obligation. I've taken that on. We didn't have that obligation before we came to our agreement. What's your new legal obligation? You have got to pay $400. So our agreement then is supported by legal consideration, because both of us have taken on an obligation we did not have before we made the agreement. Is selling a car something that's legal? Yes. So we don't have a legality problem with our contract. And let's assume both of us are adults who know what we're doing. We're not drunk or insane. So we both have capacity to contract. Would that be an enforceable contract? Yes. So let's just play it out to the end. Let's assume I offer to sell you my car for $400. You come to my house and you say, I accept your offer. Here's the $400. And I say at that point, I'm not selling my car after all. Can you sue me for breaking our contract? I think the answer would be yes, because our contract has all 5 elements of a valid contract. There was an offer which was accepted. That agreement was supported by consideration. The contract was for a legal purpose, and both of us had capacity to contract. So could the buyer sue the seller for refusing to sell the car? Yes. There's an example of a breach of contract. And you can see why we need contract law. Otherwise, the buyer would just be out of luck. He'd have to go look for another car, and there's nothing he can do about it. But because we have the contract law, That buyer now can go to court and ask the court to be awarded compensation because the other party breached the contract. Right? So there's what we're talking about when we talk about a valid and enforceable contract. One which has all 5 elements of a valid contract and which therefore can be enforced in court if the other party breaches the contract. Right? So there you go. And if we didn't have that system, if we didn't have enforceable contracts, I think we couldn't do business. I think it would be nearly impossible for us to rely on other people in order for us to do business. The only way we can do business then, if we have to rely on others, is to somehow come up with a system to force them to do what they've promised to do. And that's why we have contracts. Okay, now I put together some hypotheticals. All right. And I did this because for 2 reasons. I think it's going to help us clarify in our heads how we determine whether a contract is valid and enforceable in court. It's also going to help us on the exams because I'm going to ask questions like this on our exams. Because contract law is so important to our class, I would think that you're going to get a contracts question both on the midterm, the first exam, and the final exam. Remember, 2 exams in this class. One sort of in the middle of the semester. I called it a midterm, but it's exam number 1. And then a final exam at the end. Both of those exams, trust me, they will have a contracts question on there. So let's use a basic example and see if we can work through it together. So here's the next slide. Hypothetical number 1. Jack says to Diane, if you go to the dance with me, I will pay you $50. Diane accepts and goes to the dance with Jack. Then Jack refuses to pay. Can Diane go to court and enforce this agreement against Jack? Well, only if this agreement satisfies all the elements of a valid contract. So if you got this question on an exam, here's how I would suggest you answer it. I would write it this way. By the way, it's going to be an essay exam. Both of them will. So here's how I think I would answer this question. Is this an enforceable contract? That's the question. Here's how I'd start. This agreement is enforceable only if it meets the 5 elements of a valid contract: offer, acceptance, consideration, legality, and capacity. This conversation started with an offer from Jack, which was, if you go to the dance with me, I will pay you $50, which Diane then accepted. So there was an offer by Jack, which was accepted by Diane. Element number 3 was the agreement to go to the dance supported by legal consideration. Well, we have to ask this question. Did each party take on an obligation as a result of the agreement? Did each party take on an obligation they didn't have before they made the agreement? Well, let's see. How about Jack? Has he taken on an obligation here as a result of his agreement? Yeah, he's got to pay $500. Has Diane taken on an obligation she didn't have before they made the agreement? Yeah, she's got to go to the dance with Jack. So is this agreement then supported by legal consideration? Yes, because both parties have taken on a new obligation. See how this works? Next question, is this kind of contract legal? Or put another way, is this kind of contract illegal? No. So it meets the legality element of a valid contract. And finally, do both parties have capacity to enter into a contract? Well, it looks as though both Jack and Diane are adult people who are sane. Doesn't appear they've been drinking. So they have the capacity to enter into a contract. So is this a valid and enforceable contract between Jack and Diane? The answer is yes. So can Diane go to court and sue Jack? Yes. I think she'd go to court and ask that the court order Jack to pay her the $500. And I think the court would do that. So she's gone to court claiming Jack breached the contract. She's entitled to the damage he caused. And the damage is not having paid her the $500. She's entitled to that $500. Right, so there you go. There's a basic example of a valid contract and how you would describe it on an exam. So it's important that you go through those 5 elements of a valid contract and you do it on the exam. If you don't do that on the exam, if you just say, yes, this looks like a valid contract and Diane should get $500. So if that's the answer to the question, you're probably not going to get the points, not going to get the grade you were hoping for. So I'm looking for the students then, before they determine, and in order to determine whether an agreement is an enforceable contract, you have to go through those 5 steps and you have to describe to me how each of those 5 elements are met based on the facts I give you in the question. All right, so here's the next one. I'm doing it here. I'll pay you $50 if you listen to this video lecture. And you listen to the lecture. All right. And I refuse to pay the $50. Can you sue me for breach of contract? Well, let's see. Did I make you an offer? Yeah, I made you an offer. I'll pay you $50 if you listen to this video lecture. You accept my offer by listening to the lecture. So we have offer and acceptance. Now we get to consideration. Have I taken on an obligation I didn't have before? Yes, I now have to pay you $50. Did you take on a new obligation that you didn't have before? No, you already had the obligation to listen to this video lecture. You haven't taken on a new legal obligation. And so this agreement is not supported by consideration. So if you tried to sue me for the $50, you'd lose your case in court because the court would find that this is not an enforceable contract because it lacks legal consideration. All right, so you can see what you might be up against on an exam. Remember, in order for there to be legal consideration, both sides, both parties have to take on a new obligation that they didn't have before. All right, here's another hypothetical. Another example. Jack says to Diane, because you've been so nice to me in the past year, I will give you $500. Diane responds, that's very kind of you. I accept. Jack then refuses to pay. Can Diane go to court and demand the $500? The answer would be yes, but only if we have a valid and enforceable contract. So we have to go through the steps. Did Jack make an offer? Yes. Because you've been so kind to me in the past year, I'll pay you $500. Did Diane accept the offer? Yes, she did. Again, we're down to the element of consideration. As a result of this contract, this agreement, does Jack take on an obligation he didn't otherwise have? Yeah, he now has to pay $500. Has Diane taken on a new obligation as a result of this contract, this agreement? The answer is no. What she did for Jack, she did in the past. She doesn't have to do anything from this point forward. And so she has not taken on a new legal obligation. And so this agreement is not supported by consideration, which means Jack doesn't have to pay Diane. Right? So students generally struggle with the element of consideration. It's not an easy part of contract law because the word, maybe it's the wrong kind of word to use when we talk about contracts. Consideration doesn't mean being kind and nice and generous to the other person. That's not what it means. That's what it means, in usual English language when we talk to each other, being very considerate toward you. That's not what it means in the law. It has a very special meaning in contract law. So legal consideration exists when both parties to the agreement take on a new obligation that they didn't have before. If that's missing, then we don't have a valid contract. Let's do another hypothetical. Jack says to Diane, if you break into our neighbor's house and steal the TV, I will pay you $500. Diane accepts, breaks into the house, and returns with the TV. Jack refuses to pay. Can Diane sue him in court? Let's see. Did Jack make an offer? Yes. If you break into our neighbor's house and steal the TV, I'll pay you $500. Did Diane accept the offer? Yeah. She broke into the house and took the TV out. So they have an agreement. Is it supported by legal consideration? Well, as a result of their agreement, did Jack take on an obligation? Yes, he's got to pay $500. Did Diane take on a new obligation? Yes, she's now going to break into somebody's house and steal a TV. So here we actually have offer, acceptance, and consideration. Now we have to talk about step 4. Is this contract for a legal purpose? No. Breaking into someone's house and stealing a TV, that's a crime. So this kind of contract is not enforceable because it's illegal. So there's an example of illegality. That's why we have to go through all of the 5 steps in order to determine whether there's a valid and enforceable contract. Offer, acceptance, consideration, legality, and capacity. We haven't talked about capacity yet. All right. So, but we can give you an example, and we'll talk about the solution in a little while. But let's take an earlier example here. How about this one? Let's go right back to the beginning. Jack, a 16-year-old, says to Diane, if you go to the dance with me, I will pay $500. Diane accepts and goes to the dance with Jack. Then Jack refuses to pay. We said earlier, there's both offer, acceptance, and consideration. This is not an illegal contract. The question, though, the 5th element is, did Jack have the capacity to enter into this contract because he's only 16? He's a minor. Are there special rules when minors enter into contracts? Yes. We're going to talk about those in a few minutes, but that's where capacity comes in. That's an example of one of the parties to the contract might have a capacity problem because he's a minor. All right, so we'll talk about capacity in a little while. But so, believe me when I tell you, on my exams, you're going to get a question. I'm going to give you some facts. Someone's probably going to make an offer. The other party accepts it. And in the end, I'm going to ask you, is that an enforceable contract in court? And in order to answer that question, you have to go through those 5 steps in your answer. I want to see you go through those. I want to read it in your answer. Did you go through the 5 steps of a valid contract? All right, so I'm giving you a hint about what to do on those exams. If you do it, you're going to get a good grade. You're going to be happy. All right, here's one now. It's a YouTube, but it's actually YouTube that talks about a famous contracts law case that went to court. And it's a famous case. All law students who are studying contract law, my students, they have to read this case, Hamer versus Sidway. And the question here is, was there consideration to support this agreement? So let's watch the video together. Let me see if I can, let me make sure first that you can hear the sound. I'm going to share the sound. Let me open this YouTube. Okay, so here it is. Hopefully you can hear the sound. If not, you can click the link on the PowerPoint and listen to it yourself. But here it goes. I think you're hearing this. Remember, Hamer versus Sidway. Here it is.
William Story promised to pay his nephew $5,000 if he would abstain from drinking, using tobacco, swearing, and playing cards or billiards for money until he reached age 21.
Okay, hold it right there. Has the uncle made an offer to the nephew? Yes. Don't smoke, drink, swear, play cards, gamble until you're 21 years old. There's the offer. Okay, so here we go. Let's see what the nephew says.
At the time, the drinking age was 18, so the nephew had a legal right to drink before he turned 21. The nephew abided by the conditions that his uncle had set, and after his 21st birthday, the nephew asked his uncle for payment.
Okay, so here we are. The offer from the uncle, don't do all of these things before you turn 21. And the nephew did it. He didn't do any of those things before 21. So on his 21st birthday, he wants to get paid. So we have an offer from the uncle and acceptance by the nephew. He accepted the offer by not doing any of those things. So here's what the nephew's thinking. There was an offer from my uncle, and I accepted that offer. he's got to pay me $5,000. But the nephew's got to be smart, like you're smart. The nephew has to ask some other questions. Yes, there was offer and acceptance, but is there consideration to support this agreement? And the answer to that question is this: did the uncle, as a result of this agreement, take on a new obligation that he didn't have before? Yes. Now he's got to pay, as a result of his promise, got to pay the nephew $5,000. So he's taken on an obligation. How about the nephew? What obligation has he taken on that he didn't have before? Well, if you noticed, at the time this agreement was made, the drinking age was 18. The nephew, however, by accepting the offer of the uncle, agreed not to drink or do any of those things until he was 21. So is he taking on a new obligation he didn't have before? Yes. Now, instead of being able to drink at 18, he's now, as a result of the agreement, not going to drink until he's 21. So has he taken on a new obligation that he didn't have before? Yeah, now he's obligated not to drink until he's 21. So he's taken on a new obligation, which means what? There's consideration to support this agreement, which means, by the way, first of all, we got to go through two more steps. So far we have offer, acceptance, consideration. Is this kind of promise illegal? No. Do both of them have capacity? Well, let's see. The uncle was certainly an adult, and maybe the nephew was under 21 when he accepted the offer. But if you think about it, the nephew was not able to accept the offer until he turned 21, because it was only at that point that he didn't do any of the smoking and the gambling stuff that he promised not to do. So at the time of he accepted the offer by fully performing, he was 21. So we really have two adults here. So there's no capacity problem. So it looks like we've got a valid and enforceable contract. Let's see what the court said. So let's let the video play on.
The uncle agreed that the nephew had honored his promise, but he told his nephew that the money would be held in a bank until the uncle believed the nephew was ready. The nephew agreed, and while his $5,000 was still in the bank, the nephew assigned his interest in the money to his wife, who in turn assigned the interest to Louisa Hamer.
All right, so let's talk about that. So if it's a valid and enforceable contract with the nephew, is the nephew then entitled to $5,000 payment? Yes, he is. He now has the legal right to $5,000 payment. All right. And under contract law, if you have a contract right to payment, you can transfer that right to other people. So that's what the nephew did. The nephew said, hey, I have the right to $5,000. I'm going to give that right to my wife. And then my wife gave that right to Louisa Hamer. Is that legal? Yeah, you can do that. Which means now Louisa Hamer has the right to collect $5,000 from the uncle because we have a valid and enforceable contract. So let's see what happens.
The uncle died without paying the money to his nephew. Hamer demanded payment from Franklin Sidway, the executor of the uncle's estate. Sidway refused to pay, saying there was no enforceable contract because the nephew gave no consideration for the uncle's promise of $5,000. Hamer moved to enforce the contract and collect the money. Hamer argued that the nephew's abstinence from drinking, swearing, gambling, and tobacco use formed adequate consideration for the agreement, making it a valid and enforceable contract. Hamer won at the trial level, but when the executor appealed, the decision was reversed. Hamer appealed to the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals of New York. The Court of Appeals unanimously held that there was adequate consideration to establish a contract. The court held that consideration is not limited to just a benefit to one party. Consideration is also found where a party agrees to incur a detriment. Here, the nephew agreed to refrain from activities in which he was otherwise entitled to engage. The uncle did not need to have actually enjoyed a benefit from his nephew's promise. The nephew's voluntary restriction of his legal freedom was enough to establish consideration. Hamer v. Sidway is important in contract law because it establishes that forbearance, or that is, agreeing not to do something that you have a legal right to do, can constitute adequate consideration sufficient to form a valid and enforceable contract.
Okay, so there we go. There's Hamer versus Sidway. Yes, it's a great case because people who don't know a lot about contract law, this is a good way to introduce them to the concept of consideration. All right, so just to recap, uncle makes a promise to nephew, I'll pay you $5,000 if you don't smoke or drink until you're 21. The nephew accepts the offer by not smoking or drinking until he's 21. So we have offer and acceptance. Was there consideration to support that agreement? Well, we have to look for what? We have to look for a new obligation for both of the parties. The uncle's new obligation is to pay $5,000. The nephew's obligation was to what? Refrain from drinking until 21, something he had a legal right to do. So he's taken on the obligation, which he didn't otherwise have, not to drink until he's 21, which is legal consideration to support the agreement. So turns out that's a valid and enforceable contract. The uncle who died, his estate's going to have to pay, right? So again, think of it this way. Maybe this is a good way to think about it. If I ask you a question on our exam, just like this one, where member of the family makes an offer to another member of the family that they'll, if you don't, you can just basically see what I might do. It's no surprise. If I gave you the precise facts of the case of Hamer versus Sidway, at the end of that, I'm going to ask this question. Does the nephew have a valid and enforceable contract with the uncle? Your answer would be, of course. And so, again, it's the kind of case, and no kidding, I use this case to instruct my law students in contract law. They don't understand the concept of consideration any better than you do. They have to learn what it is, and I have to teach them what it is. And the word, it's a strange kind of word because it doesn't have its usual and customary meaning. Consideration when we're talking to each other and talking about each other has a different meaning than the legal consideration that we're talking about in contract law. So you got to be able to deal with it. And if you can deal with it, you're going to get a good grade on the exams. Right? It's really that simple. Right? So let me go back to the PowerPoint slides. I hope they're back up. I think they are. I think I've done everything right. All right. So let me go back just to go. Okay, there's our Hamer versus Sidway. All right. So I probably won't call it Hamer versus Sidway on the exam. I'll just give you the same facts as Hamer versus Sidway. And if you see that on the exam, you know how to deal with it. Right. So I think the nice part about that one case is that it teaches a whole lot of stuff about contract law. And it's a valuable tool, and law professors have been using this case for years and years and years because it's really good. It's a good case to help explain the concept of consideration. All right, so let's move on. So again, be prepared for a question on my exams where I'm asking you, give you some facts. Someone makes an offer, maybe someone accepts the offer. In the end, I'm going to be asking you, is that a valid and enforceable contract? Can we go to court and enforce this as a contract? Your answer is going to be yes, if it meets all of the 5 necessary elements of a valid contract: offer, acceptance, consideration, legality, capacity. Right. Okay. Now, what happens if, and we've had an example of this, what happens if you had offer, acceptance, and consideration? Is it possible the contract is still not enforceable? Well, remember back here. Remember this example? Jack makes an offer, break into the house and steal the TV. Diane accepts the offer. Does each party take on a new obligation? Yes. So actually there's offer, acceptance, and consideration, but this contract in hypothetical number 4, it's illegal and therefore can't be enforced in court. All right, so are there times when you have offer, acceptance, and consideration, but the contract is still not enforceable. Yeah. And so that's the first bullet point here. It might be a contract, but it's for an illegal purpose, and so that can't be enforced. One of the parties might lack legal capacity. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So just relax. That's the next slide. Lack of genuine assent. In other words, lack of actual agreement. Someone was pretending, someone was committing a fraud. All right, that can happen. And then lack of proper form. Sometimes contracts have to be in writing. Sometimes they don't. We'll talk about that. So I guess at this point, here's all I'll say. If I was asked this question, do all contracts have to be in writing? My answer would be no. There are contracts that can be made verbally, and they're just as enforceable as if there was a writing. All right, we just have to figure out under what circumstances do certain kinds of contracts have to be in writing, and we'll get there. All right, we're building our knowledge slowly over time. All right, so we've talked about offer acceptance, consideration. We've even had an example of an illegal contract. Now we have to talk about that capacity element. Do both parties have the legal capacity to enter into a contract? So here's some examples. People who don't have capacity. We can start at the bottom. People who are intoxicated. If you're so drunk you can't understand what you're doing, then you can't enter into an enforceable contract. If you're mentally ill to the point where you don't understand the nature of what you're doing, you can't enter into a contract. That contract, if you do enter into one, it's not enforceable. So think about it. Certain people, we have to protect certain people from themselves, and the law does that. So a person with a mental disease, legally insane. We can use an example. Someone has now got Alzheimer's disease. It's an old person. The old person owns a house. So someone comes to the old person knowing that he has Alzheimer's disease and says, hey, I will buy your house for $50. And the old man, because he's got Alzheimer's, says yes. Doesn't really, just says yes. And the guy pays the $50. Do we have a valid and enforceable contract? Well, was there an offer? Yeah, there was an offer to purchase the house. Was the offer accepted? Yes, the old man accepted. Are both parties now obligated to do something? Yeah, the man's got to pay the 50 and the old man's got to give up the house. So is there consideration to support that agreement? Yes. Is selling a house a legal kind of contract? Sure. But did the man lack capacity because of his Alzheimer's disease, the old man? Did he lack capacity to enter into that agreement? I think the answer is yes. And therefore, the man could not force the guy to accept the $50 for the house because it's not a valid and enforceable contract. So you can see where capacity comes in. You see also on the slide, in fact, the first bullet point, minors, people under 18. Should we have some special rules in contract law to protect young people? Because, young people often make bad decisions. Sometimes make bad decisions, maybe not often. And so the law has come up with a set of rules for dealing with situations where minors enter into contracts. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. All right. So we're going to take the special case of minors who enter into contracts. All right. Now make sure you make note of the things I'm about to say. Okay. Thing number one, can minors enter into contracts? The answer is yes. What's special about minors is this. This is the second thing you better note. When minors do enter into contracts, minors can avoid the contract and simply disaffirm the contract. That's the way we protect minors. When they do enter into contracts, we allow them to get out of the contract by simply disaffirming it. I'm not going to perform, says the minor. So we'll use an example. All right. We'll start with a simple example, and then we'll get more complicated. So, minor goes to a store and buys a skateboard. He's 16-year-old, goes to a store and buys a skateboard from the owner of the store, who's an adult, and pays the owner $50 for the skateboard. Probably that's a little low, but that's what I'm thinking. Anyway, $50 for the skateboard. The minor takes it home, doesn't like it. There's nothing wrong with it, just doesn't like it, or changed his mind. He's not interested in skateboarding anymore. He's going to go into snowboarding. So he just doesn't want the skateboard anymore. So he brings it back to the store and says, here's your skateboard. I want my money back. Well, the owner of the store might say the following thing. Hey, kid, we have a valid and enforceable contract. You came in here, you made an offer to buy a skateboard. I accepted your offer by selling it to you. Was that agreement supported by consideration? Let's see. Did you take on an obligation as a result of our agreement? Yeah, you had to pay $50. Did I take on an obligation as a result of our agreement? Yeah, I had to deliver the skateboard to you. I had to hand it to you. So we have an offer, we have acceptance, and we have consideration. Let's see, the fourth element, there's nothing illegal about a skateboard. The problem is the fifth element, capacity. Remember my rule. When a minor enters into a contract, the minor can disaffirm, that's the magic word, disaffirm the contract anytime the minor wants. So could the minor go back to the skateboard shop, disaffirm the contract by returning the skateboard and demanding, is he entitled to his $50 back? Yes. Right? That's how we protect minors. We give them the opportunity to void the contract at any time they wish. Right, so there you go. So do minors lack the capacity to contract? No. But they have less capacity. And so we protect their youth and immaturity by allowing them to disaffirm their contract. All right? Okay, so let's take a little bit more complicated example. Something you might see on an exam. 16-year-old kid talking to his friends at school and sees that some of his friends have got fancy sports cars and he doesn't. And so he's not happy. So he's going to fix that problem. And here's how he does it. He goes to a car dealer and he says to the car dealer, I'd like to buy that sports car over there. I'll give you my life savings of $250 as a down payment. And then I'll just make monthly payments on the car. And the dealer says, hey, fine, great. All right, let's write all this down. So they do. So the kid, 16-year-old, offers to buy the car. The car dealer accepts. And the kid pays the down payment, agrees to make monthly payments on the car. And after all that's done, the dealer hands the kid the keys and the kid drives away with the car. And the kid drives the car for a few months, shows it off to his friends, races it around, wears out the brakes, wears down the tires, and even gets into a small accident where he puts a dent in the fender. And then he decides he's tired of this car. He drives it back to the dealer. And he says to the dealer, here's your car back. I don't want it anymore. Give me back my down payment. The car dealer says, hey, kid, you signed a contract. That car's yours. And by the way, you haven't made any of the monthly payments. So I'm going to sue you for breaching your promise to make monthly payments. So how would we resolve that case now that we know something about contract law? Let's see. Was there a valid and enforceable contract between the minor and the car dealership? Well, was there an offer? Yeah, the kid offered to buy a car. Did the dealer accept the offer? Yes. Was there consideration to support that agreement? Yes. The kid took on an obligation now to make the down payment and monthly payments. And the car dealer took on the obligation of delivering the car to the kid. So there's consideration to support that agreement. Is selling a car a legal contract? Sure. So it's not a legality problem. Is there a capacity problem? Well, let's see. A minor, they can enter into contracts, but minors can also disaffirm their contracts. Did this minor disaffirm the contract? Yes. He returned the car to the dealer, said he didn't want it anymore, demanded his down payment back. Is the dealer required to give back the down payment? Yes. So the dealer's going to take back the car, give the kid back the down payment. But we're not finished. Can the dealer sue the minor for not making the monthly payments? The answer is no, because the kid disaffirmed the entire contract, including his promise to make monthly payments. Can the kid do all of these things? Yes. Can the dealer do anything about that? No. So there's a really good example of the element of capacity. So in a way, then, I guess it's probably more accurate to say that minors have a limited capacity to contract. They can enter into contracts, but they can also walk away from them. They can disaffirm the contracts. All right, so that's how we would deal with that example. And there's one more thing we have to talk about. There's some other rules for minors. And here they are. What if a minor is in a position where the minor needs, in an emergency, food or shelter or clothing, and so enters into a contract for some of those things? Does the minor then have to pay? Because these are necessities. All right, here's the rules. All right, here's what the law says. If a minor enters into a contract to purchase emergency food, shelter, or clothing, then the minor cannot disaffirm those contracts and has to pay. So we'll use an example. All right, minor is driving down the street and it starts to snow. This is probably not happening in Florida, probably happening where I grew up. And the snow keeps falling and it's endless. And so now there's feet of snow on the ground and the car can't go anymore because it's blocked by the snow, and the kid abandons the car at the side of the road. And now it's nighttime and it's 20 degrees outside. He starts to walk and he's getting colder by the minute, and he sees in the distance a little motel. So he goes into the motel and asks for a room. The manager gives him the key. The kid stays overnight in the room, comes down the next morning. The manager says, okay, kid, that'll be $100 for the room. The kid says, I'm just a minor. I disaffirm the contract to rent the room. Can the minor do that? The answer is no. The kid needed shelter in that snowstorm. So he made an agreement to rent the room because it was a necessity. And so he's going to be bound to pay for that necessity, even though he's a minor. He cannot disaffirm that contract for the hotel room. Right, so see how it works? Minors can enter into contracts, but they can also disaffirm them once they've made the contract. But minors cannot disaffirm contracts for emergency food, shelter, and clothing. Right? So, do minors have the capacity to contract? Yes. But do we need special rules to protect minors anyway? Yes, that's why we have all these rules. Because you know what? Minors often make bad decisions. So we need to protect them. And we protect them by having these legal rules about contracting. All right. Okay, so there you go. So yes, I'm a minor, but I can enter into a contract, but I know that I can always disaffirm it later on, and there's nothing the adult can do about it. All right. So again, this is a really great example that I can use on an exam. So if you see a question like this, where a kid goes in and buys a car, he's only 16, then wants to return the car later, I might ask this question: is the minor legally required to go through with the contract? And your answer is going to be no, because minors can disaffirm their contracts. Is the minor legally required to make the monthly payments? No, because the minor can disaffirm that contract too. Let me give you one more example. It's actually from the bar exam. The bar exam is the exam that law students have to take after 3 years. So you go to law school for 3 years, but you're not licensed to be a lawyer yet. The state in which you want to be a lawyer, they have a licensing requirements, and all states have a requirement. Well, all states but one require that before you get your law license, you have to pass a big exam called the bar exam. And so my students ultimately have to face having to pass the bar exam. If they don't, they've gone to law school, but they don't have a license to practice law, so they have to pass the bar exam. So here's a question from the bar exam. A kid, 14-year-old, bugs his dad, please get one of those satellite dishes so I can watch all the sports games I want. Kid's a sports fanatic. Father says, okay. So one day the dad comes home with a box, and in the box is a satellite dish. And the kid says, well, what am I supposed to do with this, Dad? Isn't somebody going to install it? And the dad says, no, I didn't buy the installation package. I just bought the dish. That's what you said you wanted. So the kid, frustrated, he calls the cable company and says, I need you to send a technician out to install this satellite dish. And the guy on the other end says, hey, how old are you? And the kid says, I'm 14. And so the technician says, well, I don't usually do this for, young kids like you, but okay, yeah, I agree to come out and put up the satellite dish for you. And it's going to cost $100. And the kid says, okay, I'll send you a check today. And the guy says, okay, I'm not going to come out until I receive the check. So the kid writes the check, sends it to the guy, and the guy gets the check. And he comes out and he installs the satellite dish. So let's stop for a minute. Did a contract form between the 14-year-old and the satellite company? Well, did the kid make an offer? Yes, here's the offer. Would you come out and put up our satellite dish? And the technician on the other side basically said, yeah, I accept. I'll do that for you if you pay me $100. So there's their agreement. Was it supported by consideration? Well, does the technician now have an obligation? Yeah, he's going to come out and put up the dish. Did the kid take on an obligation? Yeah, he had to pay $100. So we have a offer, we have an acceptance, and we have consideration. Putting up a satellite dish is certainly not illegal, so there's no legality problem. Do we have a capacity problem? Remember, the minor is now entered into a contract. Can he do that? Yes, but the kid can also disaffirm. So the technician arrives, and the kid has second thoughts. He's worried that when his dad finds out, his dad's going to be angry. So when the satellite technician shows up, the kid says, oh, don't bother. I don't want you to put the dish up after all. Can the cable company sue the kid for breach of contract? I think the answer is no, because the kid has disaffirmed the contract. He's allowed to do that because he's a minor. So is the cable company entitled to anything as far as damages go? No. And that's, of course, the risk you run when you enter into a contract with a minor. So I know some of you are thinking this. I know you are, because I've taught this class many times, and I know students always seem to come up with this idea, which is a great idea. But we can solve this problem. Like the kid who went and bought the car, all the dealer's got to do is ask for a cosigner. In other words, have the kid's father come in and co-sign for the car. And that would solve the problem, because here's what would happen then. So let's assume the kid signs the contract and then the father signs the contract as a co-signer. The co-signer father, what does he agree to do? He's agreed to pay if the kid doesn't. All right, he's called a surety. He'll pay if the kid doesn't pay. So kid drives the car around and then returns it to the dealer. It says, I disaffirm the contract. Can the kid do that? Yes. Is the father nevertheless required to pay? Yes. All right, so because the agreement by the father to pay if the kid doesn't, that's an agreement between the father, an adult, and the dealer, who's an adult. So although the kid can avoid the contract, the father can't. So that's how you solve the problem. If you're going to enter into a contract with a minor, you run a risk that the minor will, in the end, disaffirm the contract. So how do you solve that problem? Get someone to co-sign for the minor, so that if the minor disaffirms, the adult will have to pay. Right? I know you're probably thinking about that. Maybe a co-signer on a loan or a co-signer on a lease. That's what that's all about. Especially when you're dealing with minors. There's no guarantee the minor is going to perform under the contract. The minor might disaffirm. How do I avoid that risk if I'm the business person? Well, I get someone to stand as surety. I get a co-signer. Right? Okay, so there you go. There's now, are there some other rules relating to minors and contracting? There's a few more. I don't know that you need to know all of the sort of nitty gritty when it comes to minors and contracting, but you know the basic stuff now, and you know the important stuff, just based on what we've talked about so far. Right? You're in a good position to understand. So maybe you got to ask yourself this question. Maybe this is the really relevant question for today when it comes to minors. Would you, a business person, enter into any kind of a contract with a minor? That's not a legal question. That's really a business question. You have to make a decision, as I think, like this. I now know that if I enter into a contract with a minor, the minor can disaffirm the contract, can simply avoid it, walk away. That's a risk for me. If I sell something to a minor, the minor can always bring it back and demand his payment back. He can disaffirm that contract. See, that makes me uncomfortable if I'm the business person selling products. So I have to ask myself, am I willing to run the risk that if I sell this product to the kid, he might return it and demand his money back? Yeah, that's a risk. Am I willing to accept that risk? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. For example, maybe what I'm selling to the kid are the kinds of things kids really like, and they never bring them back. So I don't really have much of a risk there. Or maybe it's a car. That is risky. Those are expensive. Trust me, I just had to buy one. It's painfully expensive. If you're the car dealer, you don't want that car back on your lot, all used up, and damaged. If you deal with a minor, you might end up there. You don't want that. So if you're the car dealer, and because there's so much at stake, you might not enter into contracts with minors unless they have a co-signer. That reduces the risk to your business. And by the way, the heart and soul, I think, of business, doing business, is this. It's all about risk management. If you're the manager of a business, you have to do everything you can to reduce the risk to your business. So think about it. You're the manager of a hamburger joint. You've got to make sure that the place runs right and that you're not, that the business is not facing any serious risk. So for example, you know that when people eat food out in your, in the area where they eat, they spill stuff and they drop stuff. And after they do that and it's laying on the floor, people slip and fall on that stuff. So does it make sense for you as part of your management, responsibilities to make sure that the floors are clean and not slippery? Of course it is. Why are you doing that? Because if you don't do it, you create a serious risk to your business that someone might sue the business because they got hurt there. So every day that you act as a manager in business, you are constantly doing that. You may not be thinking about it, every second of the day, but you are constantly trying to reduce the risks that might be posed to your business. And that's your responsibility. You have to do that. So you're looking for opportunities to increase your business, but you're also looking to avoid things that can damage your business. Right? So risk management is really part of management. All right. Now, can minors avoid? We just talked about all this. All right. So what's on this slide is all the things we talked about when minors enter into contracts. Minors can enter into contracts, but they can disaffirm them. So on the exam, if I ask you a question about minor entering into a contract, make sure you use the word disaffirm. That tells me that you've been listening to this lecture and reading the textbook, which also talks about all of these issues. You know? We also talked about this. What if the minor enters into a contract for necessities? Does the minor have to pay? Yes. Can the minor disaffirm that contract? No. We didn't talk about the bottom thing on this slide, so we just take a minute and talk about that. It's called, again, another word that has legal significance, ratification. All right, so here's where this comes into play. So you need to know two more rules of law. What happens when a minor enters into so let's take our kid, the kid who buys the car. He buys the car when he's 17 and a half. And now he's turned 18 and he wants to disaffirm the contract. Can he still disaffirm even though he's now legally an adult? He's turned 18. And the rule is this. Minors can disaffirm contracts made when they were minors for a reasonable time after they turn 18 and become adults. So can a minor disaffirm a contract on his 18th birthday? Yes. The law says he has a reasonable time after he turns 18 to still disaffirm a contract he made when he was a minor. So we protect minors even after they become adults, because there's that ability of minors to disaffirm contracts even after they turn 18. Right now, let's talk about a different situation. What if, again, using my example of the kid, the 17 and a half-year-old kid buys the car from the dealer, no cosigner, just the kid. He's now 18, and he calls up the dealership and he says, you know, I really like the car. I'm driving it. I'm having a blast with it. I'm going to keep it forever. Right? After he says that, can he then disaffirm? The answer is no. By telling the car dealer that he's going to go forward and perform under the contract, he has ratified a contract that he made when he was a minor. So once he becomes an adult, if he ratifies the contract he made when he was a minor, he's going to be stuck with that contract. He cannot disaffirm. And so that's what ratification means. That a minor who made a contract as a minor then becomes an adult and then agrees to perform under the contract. He's ratified the contract and he can't thereafter disaffirm. That's all ratification means. And then, that's a pretty rare thing. It doesn't happen too often. All right. Okay, so I think you've got a pretty good dose of contract law today. I think we've got a little bit more to talk about. We'll talk more about that next class. Right, so we're not finished with contracts yet. But I'd like to stop here because it really is the essential basics of contracting. So to recap, here's what I think you should now know, or when you go back over this video or you look at the PowerPoint slides again, you should be able, at the end of all that, to know the following things. Number one, the elements of a valid enforceable contract. That is, offer acceptance, consideration, legality, and capacity. You should be able to talk about all of those elements and that they all have to exist in order for a contract to be enforceable in court. Right? So you know the essential 5 elements of a valid contract. If any of them is missing, then the contract's not enforceable. You also know that certain people entering into contracts might lack the capacity to enter into the contract, and their contracts may not be enforceable. So we talked about people who are so drunk they don't know what they're doing, or people who have a mental illness who don't know what they're doing. Those contracts should not be enforced against those people. We need to protect them from themselves. And we talked about the situation of minors, a special case of capacity. Minors actually are allowed to enter into contracts, but they can disaffirm them. And there's nothing the adult can do about it. All right, so we talked about that. So if I gave you a question on an exam dealing with an agreement between 2 or more people, I would expect you to be able to answer the question, is that a valid and enforceable contract? If you get a question on an exam where a minor enters into a contract, I expect that you'd be able to answer a question like, is that a contract that the adult can enforce against the minor? You should be in a position to be able to do that now. And of course, in doing all of those things, you should be able to talk about with some authority the concept of consideration, what that is. Right? It's a difficult concept. Trust me, my law students have trouble with it. I would expect you to be, in the same boat. And by the way, there's no reason why you can't know these concepts as well as some law student. There's no difference between you and them. They're just in a different school. Right? These concepts, these legal concepts, they're not magical. They don't require some special knowledge or language. They're just rules that most people don't know because they haven't gone to law school. But I think some of which are essential to you business people. And contract law is one of those things. Right? So we've talked about the formation of a contract, how a contract is made and whether it's enforceable. The special case of contracts made by people who might lack capacity to contract. We've even talked about contracts for an illegal purpose. Those are not enforceable either. So you've got a really good, I think, basis in contract law. There are some other things we need to talk about in our next class. So we need to expand our knowledge of contract law to some degree. And so I'm going to cover, so anything more about contract law that I think you need to know for business, we're going to cover that next class. So between this class and the next one, you're going to be well equipped for dealing with the issues relating to contracts. Okay, so there's the sort of substantive part of our class today. Now I want to talk about the first management team assignment that you have to do. If you go on Canvas, you're going to see that you're now part of a management team. The teams are divided into either 8-person or 7-person teams. And by the way, Canvas does this for me automatically. I simply ask Canvas, create teams with 8 members. And Canvas randomly puts you into a team. So the assignment that you have to do with your team is this one. I got it on a slide. Everything you need to know is right here. All right. So management team assignment number 1. So what are you going to do? After class, after you listen to this lecture, you're going to go on Canvas and figure out whose team you're on. You're going to have to figure out with your teammates how to be in communication with each other. So you could probably do things like exchange email or phone numbers. All right. This is a virtual class. We don't meet face to face. You probably won't meet with them face to face. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll call a meeting of your team and you'll get together somewhere. So if the first steps is figure out what team you're on, who your teammates are, and figure out how you're going to communicate with them in order to complete this team assignment number 1. All right, that's step 1. Step 2, what's the assignment? All right, here it is. It's on the slide. If you go and open your textbook, as I'm about to do, here it is, to page 263. It's toward the end of a chapter on, guess what? Contract law. All right, it's at the end of chapter 12. And there's a case problem. There's a set of them. One of them is 12-2. It's called pre-existing duty. And there's some facts there. All right. And you have to come to some conclusions about a contract between parties. All right. And so it's going to require that you use the information that we've discussed today. So probably going to have to come to a conclusion. Was there a valid and enforceable contract between the parties? Was there an offer and acceptance, and was it supported by consideration? Was it a legal contract? Are there any issues of capacity? Right, so you're going to have to use the tools that I've given you today to work through that case example on page 263, and it's called pre-existing duty, and it's called 12-2. All right, so here's what you got to do. You're going to have to write up an answer to that problem. You're going to do that as teams. So I'm assuming that you're all going to pitch in with ideas about how to answer the question. And then when you come to an agreement between you, your teammates, about how you're going to answer that question, you're going to write it down. And you're going to email it to me. And it's due at the beginning of our week 7 class. So prior to the week 7 class, you have to email me the answer to that question. So what I need is I need one written answer from each team. I think we have 13 teams, so I'm going to expect 13 emails. Someone on the team is going to be responsible for sending me an email with your team's answer to the question. So I don't need 104 answers. I need 13. I need one answer from each team. Right? See how that works? So it's going to be a combined collaborative effort to come up with an answer to this question. Right? You have what? You got 4 weeks to do it. So I'm going to expect before, so that, week 7, let's designate a day. Let's assume the Monday of week 7. I'm going to expect that you have sent to me an email containing your answer to that question. Right? So the first day of the week, Monday, the first day of week 7, I'm going to expect that you have delivered to me an email with your answer, your team's answer to the question. Okay, that's how it's going to work. That's the due date. All right. Okay, now you can always do this. If you've read the problem 12-2 and you have some questions about it, you can always reach out to me and ask. Sometimes, it's not clear and students would like some clarification. I'm happy to answer those questions. What I can't do is give you the answer to the question. So don't ask me that question. If you don't understand something in the question, yeah, those are fair questions. You should be able to ask me that. But what I can't do is give you an advantage over other teams by giving you an answer. I said, so I can't do that. That wouldn't be fair. So that I won't do. So I have to make some judgments sometimes when you ask a question as to whether I think my answer to that question might give you an unfair advantage. So I really can't do that. That wouldn't be fair to the others, right? But there it is. So here we go. You've got a really good basis now for understanding what is a valid and enforceable contract. You have some pretty good knowledge about what happens when a minor enters into a contract. That's good to know. And now you're going to have the ability to put that knowledge into operation by answering the question there on page 263. Okay, see how it works? So this is not, this assignment is not to punish you. This assignment, it serves 2 purposes. One purpose that's yours and one purpose that's mine. It serves your purposes because by doing the question and thinking about it and thinking through the question, I think it's going to increase your knowledge of contract law. It'll make you a better student in contract law. The second thing it does, which it does for me, is it allows me to determine whether or not you're understanding what I'm saying and you're grasping the material. That's important to me. I need to know that you get it. And so, all the talking I'm doing, if it's not getting through to you, neither one of us are benefiting. And that's not why we go to school. And that's not why we educate ourselves. My honest belief is that this material is important to you. It's important that you understand it and be able to use it in a real world situation like this management question. Right? So this exercise is to firm up your knowledge of contracts and convince me that what I'm saying to you is getting through to you and is understood by you. That's important. Right? So there you have it. And that's all I think we need to do today. So next week, next class, we're going to be talking more about contract law. So we're not finished with contracts. And hopefully you're going to start thinking about that first management team assignment, at least contacting your teammates and making a plan, a strategy for how you're going to deal with this assignment. Okay? All right. So again, always the offer's open to reach out for me if you have questions. Now, one other thing I would like to say, and there's 104 students in this class. As you know, I'm also a full-time law professor at Ave Maria School of Law in Naples. So, I'm busy. I also have clients who I serve, as a lawyer. By the way, let me talk about that for a second, so we have no misunderstandings about that. The only law I practice now, I practice for free. If someone can't afford a lawyer and needs help, I help them for free. That's the only kind of law practice I do anymore. And that's the first thing. Second thing is I can't be your lawyer. The dean's made that very clear that I can't give legal advice to my students. Right? It's not allowed. So often it happens that students have questions about something happening in their own life, then they like some advice. I really can't do that. Right? So I'm just sort of warning you ahead of time. I can't. But so there you go. That I suppose you need to know that. All right, so that's it for today. I will see you again next time. Again, any questions, shoot them over. So my point being, with 104 students and my other students at the law school, so altogether I have almost 250 students. It might take me a little while to get back to you if you email me. So give me a little slack there. I try to get my emails answered in 24 hours, but it doesn't always turn out that way. I'm doing the best I can. So I'll get to you. And if I forget to or don't, just hit me again with another email. Say, hey, professor, I sent you an email the other day. Come on, how about an answer? That's okay. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to certainly hold that against you. I have an obligation to answer your email. So there you go. Keep that in mind when you reach out for me. All right. So stay well. I will see you next week. Take care of yourselves. I hope you enjoyed the class, and certainly there's a lot to know in contract law. So we're only beginning our studies. By the time we're finished, we're going to be really good at contract law. All right. Okay. Take care. See you next week.